song, all my sorrows, all my merriment, join in music to set hearts aflame. Father, now that I wander with thee, flowers and fields are alive with thy joy. All that I own to thee I've given, now I sing in thy love I am free. Father, now that I dance in thy name, birds and animals share in my song. All my sorrows, all my merriment, join in music to set hearts aflame. All my sorrows, all my merriment, join in music to set hearts aflame.
Our readings are taken from Rays of the One Light, weekly commentaries on the Bible and Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. This week, in surrender lies victory. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. A case might be made for surrender as a path to victory in worldly conflicts, the way of passive resistance, for example, in preference to armed resistance. But our point here concerns a higher kind of surrender, the surrender of our deluded, egoic will to the wise and almighty will of God. Human will is, as Paramahansa Yogananda used to say, guided by whims and limited understanding. The divine will is in harmony with every level of reality. Though the divine will sometimes appears to us at first to be wrong, it proves always eventually to be for our highest good. Human will is inconsistent. It leads us one day to success, another to disaster. The divine will, when we surrender to it completely, though it is not always easy to do so, always brings us deep inner peace and joy in the end. Jesus Christ demonstrated this perfect surrender to God's will in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night before he was captured and imprisoned, preparatory to his crucifixion. He went apart from the others to pray and asked them to pray also. But when he returned to them, he found them asleep. Out of his love for them, he excused them, saying, "The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." He then urged them again, saying, "Watch and pray." Their weakness in those circumstances was particularly sad, and the disciples themselves must have regretted it bitterly later on. We all know the symptoms of human weakness, though we may excuse them in ourselves, saying, "Well, after all, I'm only human." But what are the signs of true strength? We find in all cases that these are the fruit of a life wholly surrendered to God. The Bhagavad Gita lists these signs in the 13th chapter. Humbleness, truthfulness, and harmlessness, patience and honor, reverence for the wise, purity, constancy, control of self, contempt for sense delights, self-sacrifice, perception of the certainty of ill in birth, old age, and frail mortality, disease, the ego's suffering and sin, detachment, lightly holding thoughts of home, children, and wife, those ties which bind most men. An ever tranquil heart, heedless of good or adverse fortune, with the will upraised to worship me alone, unceasingly. Loving deep solitude and shunning noise of foolish crowds, calm focus on the self, perceived within and in infinity. These qualities reveal true wisdom, Prince. All that is otherwise is ignorance. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Morning, all. Nice to see you. Nice to see you. My name is Lorna, and This is Dambara, and we also have Bharti here this morning, and it's really fun to be here with you today. So in Surrender Lies Victory is a little bit hard for the warrior mind to accept. I have a friend recently, it's interesting, I have a family friend in his 90s who just passed, and he was the ultimate warrior. He had spent his life serving. He was one of those generations who managed to be born and have the karma for all three wars, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, in addition to being in World War II. He was awarded the second highest commendation, the Distinguished Service Cross that the Army gives out. When he was just a, when he was just a second lieutenant serving in the European theater in World War II. He was an amazing man. He identified with being in that protective role and serving in that way all of his life, and was a wonderful man of service even after his role as a warrior ended in that outward way. And on his deathbed, he was having a little trouble letting go. And this family was telling me that they were doing everything they could to reassure him that it was okay to go. Everything was going to be fine. His wife was going to be fine. The grandchildren were going to be fine. And it was okay to leave. And my sister was there with him. And being the wise woman that she is, and also the the daughter of another colonel who also served in all three wars, she spoke to him a little differently and told him this was not surrender. Leaving this plane and moving into the next adventure was actually his final battle, his final opportunity to serve, his final opportunity to be victorious and to move into that light and to cross that next bridge and to continue to be in that warrior consciousness of overcoming, of fighting the battle, and of never giving in to the enemy. And he passed shortly thereafter. The yogic teachings tell us that there are stages in our evolution, in our development, and that there are 4 levels in the ancient Indian caste system. They explain these 4 castes, which were really a recognition of our human evolution and the evolution of our consciousness, starting with the Shudra caste, which is also called the peasant caste. And at that level, you're very identified with the material world, with what is real through your senses, with what you can see and touch and taste and what you experience. And your main concern is about safety, is about, being fed, having a roof over your head, and your physical comfort and your physical needs. Then the next level of evolution as you move along is the Vaishya caste, which is the merchant, the caste where you start realizing that I can put out a lot of energy and I can get things done. And if I do that, then things come back to me. I can, tit for tat, I can give, I can receive, and that's sort of the classic merchant consciousness. And then after you start putting out energy and learning that that actually works for you, and the more you put out, you start to realize that it actually is fun and it's rewarding to serve, to put out energy without a lot of thought about what is coming back, what is in it for me. You start serving selflessly, and you move into the kshatriya, or the warrior caste, where you're willing to ultimately give your life for others, for a higher cause, for the greatest good, to serve and protect and give all that you are into what is best for all. And that's the classic warrior or kshatriya consciousness. Then you move into the idea that my will is not important. What I want to do, how I want to serve, how I want to give is not at issue here. What is it? What is God's will? What is the very highest? And the self begins to dissolve away into being in tune with that highest will. And that's the Brahmin caste or the priestly caste. And of course, there's a flow and a continuum and a growth that is individual for everybody as we move through all of those stages. So my friend, the colonel, was obviously born into this life to be a kshatriya in an outward way, and then as he got older, in a more and more inward way of serving others and giving no thought to his own needs. And we all have to go through that. You can't skip the warrior caste. You can't go from this part of the spectrum and then jump into being Brahmin, to jump into being thy will and not mine, as Christ exemplified in our story this morning in the Garden of Gethsemane. You have to go through that time of building your own understanding of your own will and gaining that strength within you before you can offer that will into God's will. And when he was saying, and when Christ was saying, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, it wasn't a condemnation. It wasn't we often use that phrase nowadays sort of sarcastically and as a put down often for people, that and recognition of our own weakness, and sometimes the ironic recognition of that weakness. But what he was doing was understanding. These were his disciples who had gone with him through all kinds of journeys and adventures. And there they were in the Garden of Gethsemane with him. They came with him back to the city knowing that there was a price on Jesus' head, knowing the dangers that were there. And they had even armed themselves in preparation for possibly doing battle and fighting. And they were there serving. They were the few that were left after all of the challenges of being Christ's disciple, when many of them left because they didn't understand and they didn't have the strength and the courage to continue into that unknown territory. He knew their hearts and their strength and their courage and their desire to serve. But as a guru, as an avatar, as someone who had walked that same journey, he understood how hard it is to overcome that flesh, that attachment to the senses, that sense of being human and frail and small. And he knew what it took to fight that battle and to win it. And that was to put more energy, more love, more devotion, and to offer yourself, as he showed us. This is going to be hard. I wish this didn't have to happen, not for my own comfort, but for these people, your loving children, to reject God and to say no when they could say yes. It's a painful thing to go through. And he said yes, but if this is the way it has to be. He also knew that this journey, the crucifixion, the resurrection, was going to be the greatest lesson in the lives of the disciples. This is what was going to give them the strength and the courage and the understanding to go on without him. Because there they were, and they lived through this with all of their human frailties and all of their fears, and they lived through it, and they saw him die, and then they saw him alive again. And that's what, with that experience of seeing their guru give everything to God and be victorious, they could walk on for the rest of their journey, serving that and giving themselves to God with the experience and the understanding of what was necessary. And they all went on to do it. None of them had an easy path after that, but they were able to be victorious because of that understanding. Not my will, but thy will. Swami Kriyananda, he says, an attitude of willingness is the first and forever essential step in attuning our will to God's infinite will. he often talked about willingness, not just willpower, where we just push our way through, but willingness. Willingness to do whatever it is that's in front of us. And he said there are several different ways that he encouraged us to develop that will. One, as we do up here, was Master's teaching of, we come up to the front of service every week when we do this and say, the voice of God calls us to awaken him. How will he find us when he comes? And we all answer with enthusiasm, awake and ready. Even though part of us may be still sleepy, part of us may still be, but we affirm, awake and ready. That's willingness. That is, for those who aren't aware, that little ritual that we have is actually an ode to Paramahansa Yogananda, who used to do that same thing as he came up to speak to halls filled with thousands of people. He would come running up to the dais and say, how is everyone? And how feels everyone? And get them to answer with enthusiasm, with energy, awake and ready, because they needed to. He had to have an audience that was high and willing and awake in order to help move them, help move the energy in the right direction, and know that they were listening and that they were there with him. And for those of you who've done any kind of teaching or public speaking, you know how hard it is if people are nodding off, sleeping, or they're there and you know they don't really want to be there. All of that unwillingness just blocks the energy flow. So we come up here and we say, awake and ready. Willingness. Willingness is a huge part of what we try to do here, is just remind ourselves to constantly be willing. Swami said there are a few, he gave a short list of ways to help increase our will and that willingness. One is to say yes to life. Be awake and ready. Express willingness. He even said, it's even best to express willingness even if you know you're not able to do something. So if somebody asks you to serve, to do something, and you know you're booked, you're overwhelmed, you can't do it, there's no way, it's not within your ability, whatever it is, it's better to express willingness first and say, you know, I would love to. I would really like to do that. Thank you for asking me. I wish it were possible. I will be with you there in spirit, but I'm not able to because, or I will help you find a solution, or maybe we can find someone else. To express that willingness first, to allow that energy to keep flowing through you rather than, no, I don't think I can. And he said the second is to look for solutions. Don't focus too much on problems. We all have problems we got to deal with, but always look for solutions. The third is look for goodness in people. Don't concentrate on their faults. The fourth was to face challenges vigorously. Vigorously. I love that word. Am I facing this challenge vigorously? With I can, even if it seems like you can't. With I can. I will find a way to do this. To start small if you can. Small tasks that lead up to bigger ones. Take small challenges. Challenge yourself. Take those on. Do them vigorously. And then move on to the next one that may be a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. And to focus here, at the point between the eyebrows, with a lot of vigor, with a lot of energy. And say, what was it? I didn't write down. I thought I wrote it down. Yes, I did. My will is one with thy will. United to thine, my will can move mountains. Can move mountains, united to thy will. He said there's this, to describe the divine will, or the divine energy, as a great tide of joyful energy that's moving all the time. And that we have to match that, we have to meet that, and in order for our will and the divine will, in order to unite. Now, why it's interesting to go back to this list. The one that caught my eye is number 3. Look for goodness in people. Don't concentrate on their faults. Which, of course, we know is what we're supposed to do. It's what we're supposed to do, be good people, look for goodness in people. But it's on the list of things to increase your will. Why is that? It's interesting. It's really interesting to think about. He's not talking about devotion. He's not talking about being nice. He's not talking about getting along with people. He's talking about increasing your will. Concentrate on the goodness in other people. It allows that energy to actually flow through without getting caught in negativity. Have you guys ever been? I work at Home Depot, and these things come. It's a great learning ground for me. And we have these big carts, these big flat carts. I work out in the garden department, so we do a lot of moving around of big heavy things. And loads of rock, loads of brick, big bags of mulch, and people who come back there with a cart and say they want 30 bags of mulch. Oh, I'm sure it'll all fit on this one cart, and they pile up the cart, or they put 60 big retaining walls on the cart, and then they have to move from here to get to where the checkout stand is, and you move these big heavy carts. So you're pushing along, and this has happened to me thousands of times. Pushing it along, and you think you're getting up some momentum, and you're going along, and you go, and it's this tiny little pebble. It's one little pebble that's gotten in the way under the wheel. And you have all this energy and all this momentum that you're moving, and that little pebble just stops you dead in your tracks. And you back up a little bit, and you try to get around the pebble, and you try to, there's this little, all it takes is one little pebble. Same things happen with the big reach equipment that we drive inside the store, which is similar sort of to a forklift, but it's different. It has these big fat wheels on it. And it weighs like 5 tons. It's enormous and very heavy. And it has the ability to lift like 3,000 pounds of rock, up 20 feet in the air. And you're driving it, and the same thing. You'll be scooting along in the back where we have all the rock, and we have these bags of rock. First of all, whoever thought of selling rock in plastic bags? It's really, leftover. Try loading rocks into your Ziploc bags and see how well that works. It doesn't work very well. So we're constantly sweeping and trying to get rocks out of the way. So you're driving along, and same thing, all of a sudden it's like, and it's because one little rock. And that's exactly what happens with our negative thoughts. Our negative thoughts cause little vrittis in our spine, and God is trying to flow through with all this love and goodness and incredible solutions and light and love, and our little negative thoughts go, Loving others and seeing goodness in others is one way of increasing our willpower, because it's hard to do. You got to lift your energy. It's easy to see the flaws in other people. They're very obvious. They're just hanging out there for everyone to see. It's really easy to notice them and say, yeah, look at that, and look at that, and look at that. That's low energy. That's energy going down. It's going in the wrong direction. But seeing goodness in other people, seeing what's behind all those obvious flaws and shortcomings, that takes energy. That takes moving energy up. Takes moving it here. It takes being more godlike. The more we want to be in tune with God, we have to pretend we're God. We have to be more like God. We have to fit and match that vibration. So we try to see goodness. We try to see solutions. We try to be in tune with that will. And we have to focus and concentrate. There's a man I work with who's a great soul. He works very hard. He's a kind man. He's a good man. But I have a challenge working with him, because he wants to, I guess the only way, he's scattered in his energies. And so he's constantly looking for all these different things that he thinks need to be done. And, Home Depot, just like the rest of life, you're never done. You don't check off the last thing off the list. It's just this ongoing process, opportunities all the time. And so we're going through the store, and we're trying to get something done. I get very task-oriented. We need to do this. We need to finish this. Okay, we're going to take that pallet down there because a customer's waiting for us. We're going to do this, and we have to do it together. And then he'll literally stop the equipment, get off the equipment, and say, I think maybe we need to do that over there. We have to, maybe when we get done with this, we have to do that. Or we're walking down the aisle to go get something for a customer, and he'll start doing something over here. And it makes crazy. And it's because he's unable to focus. And we need to focus our energy, because it's the same thing with God, is that here we are moving along, we're going to do this, we've got the light flowing through us, and we're over here, and then we're over there, and we think, well, that's a good idea, and okay, God, that's really nice that you're going to help me with, my financial crisis, but I've also got this other problem of what am I going to cook for dinner, and what am I going to do this, and God is trying to just flow with us and move with us and help us to lift us and take us home, take us to that star, take us in that direction. And we need to continually work on focusing and moving our energy and matching our will. All those little ideas that we think are really good ideas, but matching those with what is thy will, Lord? What do you want? What is the best? What is the solution to this? How am I going to get there? How am I going to get to freedom? There's a wonderful story in the... Okay, let me back up just a second. So there's two basic kinds of warriors. There's the outward warrior, as we were talking about, my friend, the colonel, where we're serving in this outward way. We're ready to do battle. And I really believe in our evolution of our soul consciousness, of our awareness. We probably all have to come through that stage of being a warrior. Master said he was a warrior many times in many lifetimes. And there's a lot of that in our path, being a warrior. Now, most of us now are not called to be outward, physical, pick up a weapon and fight kind of warrior. But the other kind of warrior is a spiritual warrior, is being a warrior with our own internal battle. And that's what the whole Bhagavad Gita, we hear from parts of the Bhagavad Gita every week. That's the story of the Bhagavad Gita, of the Mahabharata, which is the longer, big epic of the Battle of Kurukshetra. And it's this entire spiritual story about this battle, and the warriors, and the killing, and the fighting, and the weapons, and all of the things that happen. And it's all an allegory for the battle that's within us. The spiritual warrior needs to be just as self-sacrificing, just as focused, just as willing as the warrior on the battlefield. The spiritual warrior needs to have all of those qualities as well, but the battle is within. The battle is against those tendencies and those desires and those material concerns that come in through our senses. And that when we're a devotee, when we're a spiritual warrior, our goal is that star. Our goal is that freedom, that light, that perfect attunement with divine will. And so we need to do battle with anything that stands in our way. Anything. And that's where we have to do battle. And so the battle of Kurukshetra, and the story in the Bhagavad Gita is the little part in the middle of the battle where Krishna, the Lord, is talking to Arjuna, who is the warrior, the devotee, and telling him how to do this, how to fight the battle. But the battle, there's a whole lot of other story that goes with that in the Mahabharata. And there's this lovely part at the beginning in the Mahabharata about Krishna and Arjuna and Duryodhana. Duryodhana represents material desire, basically the forces that we're fighting against. To simplify matters, he's got a whole lot of brothers and armies and everything on his side, but Duryodhana is material desire. And then on the other side is Arjuna, who is the warrior, who's the devotee, the spiritual aspirant who wants to move toward that God consciousness. And he's preparing to do battle. Krishna is known by both of them, and Krishna is in the story. He's the Lord. He's the guru, the Lord, the representation of God. And in the story, they're trying to get help. They're soliciting the kings, all the different kingdoms, the little kingdoms around in their area to fight for their side. So both of them then get the idea, oh, Krishna, he hasn't promised to anybody yet. He's still not taken. I need to go talk to Krishna and get him to fight on my side. So they both have this thought, and they both race to go see Krishna. And Krishna is there, and Krishna is pretending to sleep, because the Lord never actually sleeps. So Krishna's, though, lying down and sleeping. So they arrive. Now Duryodhana, material desire, he arrives just a little bit before Arjuna. So he gets there first. And he comes into Krishna's chamber and he sees that he's asleep. And you don't wake him up. That's not appropriate, so he waits. First he sits at his feet, and his thought is, yeah, but this isn't I shouldn't have to sit at his feet. I'm a great king, I'm a great important person, and I want him to see me as soon as he wakes up. So he goes around to the head of the bed and sits in a chair right next to Krishna's head and waits for him to wake up. And right after he sits in the chair, then Arjuna arrives and sees that his Lord is sleeping. And Arjuna immediately bows down at Krishna's feet and sits at the foot of the bed and waits. Well, when Krishna wakes up, pretends to wake up, and as he opens his eyes, the first person he sees is at the foot of his bed, and he sees Arjuna. He says, "Oh, Arjuna, you're here, you've come." And then Duryodhana's over there on the side, excuse me, "Oh, Duryodhana, you're here as well. It's good to see both of you." He knew why they had come. "Why have you come?" "Well, we want to ask you, Krishna, to join in our battle. We want you to join forces with us." And Krishna says, "I understand." Okay, there's one. What I'll say is there are two ways. There are two options here. One is to have me in your army, just me, and the other is to have all of my forces. He had a huge army. He had elephants and warriors and all kinds of resources at his disposal that he could lend them. So he said, one of you can have all of that, and then the other person gets me. But I'm not going to fight. I will be on your side. I will be with you, but I won't fight. And then he says, "So, Arjuna, you get the first choice, because I saw you first." It was traditional. And Duryodhana is there, very concerned about this, because of course Duryodhana is material desire. Duryodhana represents all of that aspect of outward manifestation, and I will find my happiness and have my power from all that I see and feel. So I want elephants, I want warriors, I want those. That's what's going to win the battle for me. And now he's asked Arjuna first. And what idiot wouldn't take all that, wouldn't choose the army? And so he's there waiting, and there's a pause, and Arjuna says, "I want you, Lord. That's all we want. I want you." And Duryodhana is, yes, I get what I want. Arjuna, the idiot, he gets what he wants. And of course, that determines the outcome of the battle. That's the devotee saying, Not my will, but thine, Lord. Thy will. So what Krishna does in the battle, he drives Arjuna's chariot. Arjuna is a great archer. And if you've ever seen pictures, the charioteer, stands in the front. I have this wonderful rendition of this picture on my meditation, in my meditation altar of Krishna with the steeds. The horses represent the five senses, and you can get all into the old symbology of it all, which is fascinating. But it's also an amazing picture of Krishna there driving the chariot, and Arjuna there with his arrows. So Krishna is the charioteer. Now what does the charioteer do? The charioteer drives the chariot. The charioteer determines where you're going to go in battle. He's there as your guide, as the one who helps you move into the areas that you need to be. He's the one that helps you to decide how to fight the battle. Where am I going to be? How are we going to do this? Where are the weak areas? Where am I needed in this battle? And he's not fighting. He's not lending his energy and shooting the enemy. The devotee is there in the chariot. You're having to do battle. Arjuna would take the arrow here. Take the arrows and shooting the arrows and doing battle. And there's this whole long epic story, very involved, of this long, complicated, difficult, bloody battle that takes place. And Arjuna's side, is victorious because he has Krishna with him. And that's what Christ did. Not my will, but thy will. You drive the chariot, Lord. You know where we're going. You know better than I do. And I know we will be victorious if I surrender to thee. I surrender my little will into thy greater will. Not surrender in, I don't have to do anything now, but surrendering the little desires, the little ideas, the whims that Yogananda described human will as being driven by whims, the whims that we have, and letting go of that into God's will for us. I want to read, dropping papers. I want to read from Whispers from Eternity. This is Yogananda's book of prayer demands and poems that is endlessly, endlessly inspiring. How to win the battle of life. O King of Kings, train thou in me, in the camp of discipline, the noble qualities of calmness and self-control. Be thou their divine general, like Krishna of yore, against the invading hordes of darkness, passion, and greed. Protect the celestial kingdom of my mind against entry by the tenacious warriors of evil. Let thy banner of peace wave always above the strong castle of my soul. Om, peace. Amen.